In the early summer of 1912, the small town of Villisca lay quiet. A typical Midwestern community where neighbors knew each other. The streets were dusty and children played freely in the sun, unaware that a darkness far beyond their comprehension would soon descend upon them. The Moore family, Hosea Moore, his wife Sarah Moore, and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, had moved into their new home only months earlier. A modest wooden house with a small porch, a backyard orchard, and a quiet sense of security that most townsfolk took for granted, but which, in retrospect, may have concealed the very vulnerabilities that predators exploit. That fateful night of June 9th, the family had invited 2 young friends, Lena and Ina Stillinger, to stay over for an evening of shared laughter, bedtime stories, and youthful innocence, never imagining that the hours ahead would be filled not with joy, but with terror and death. The night itself was unnervingly ordinary. The stars shone faintly above. A light breeze stirred the trees, and the town, blissfully unaware, settled into sleep. Yet somewhere beyond the borders of the town, the figure of a killer patient, calculated and meticulous, approached. The Moore house, carrying not the murder weapon of an outsider, but something intimate, familiar. The family. Axe, the very instrument meant for labor and domestic use, now repurposed for carnage. The killer entered silently. No signs of forced entry. No immediate alarm, suggesting a level of planning that chilled investigators for decades to come. Inside, the household slept, unaware that the sanctity of their beds would be violated, that the warmth of their home would be replaced by a frozen horror. The murderer, acting with deliberate precision, struck each member of the Moore family in their sleep, leaving the children helpless, the parents powerless, and the 2 visiting girls in the grip of terror, all ending in a swift, merciless massacre. Once the killings were complete, the perpetrator did not flee immediately, as one might expect. Instead, they lingered, a silent, shadowed presence within the home. Investigators later discovered subtle but unsettling details. Mirrors were covered with cloth, perhaps to obscure or protect the spirit, perhaps to delay identification. A lamp was placed near the victims' heads, and food had been prepared in the kitchen, a sign that the murderer had occupied the house for an extended period. The axe, grotesquely familiar in its repurposed function, was left behind, a signature that would haunt investigators and true crime enthusiasts alike for over a century. The discovery of the crime the following morning sent shockwaves through Villisca, a town that had known little beyond its own quiet rhythm. Neighbors, upon realizing the severity of the events, called authorities in a panic, and law enforcement arrived to find a scene that defied logic and common comprehension. A home transformed from a place of warmth and security into a tableau of unspeakable horror. Bloodied floors and beds stark against the innocence of childhood toys, blankets covering the victims as if to preserve a dignity that had been violently stripped from them. From the outset, the investigation was hampered by the lack of witnesses, the absence of forensic technology, and the sheer audacity of the act, which suggested a mind both familiar with human behavior and unburdened by conscience. Speculation ran rampant as locals whispered names and motives, some pointing to Frank Fernando Jones, a man of local influence, whose history of violence and business disputes with the Moore family painted a potential motive, while others considered William Mansfield, a shadowy figure believed to have committed similar axe murders across Iowa, a suspected serial killer who may have perfected his methods through prior unsolved crimes, leaving behind a trail of terror that law enforcement could not fully trace. Newspapers of the time sensationalized the tragedy, describing the scene in harrowing detail while trying to capture the public's fascination. Yet the more they reported, the more questions remained. Why the Moore family? Why spare no one, yet leave the weapon behind? How could the killer have moved with such confidence within a house that was familiar enough to commit such intimate violence? Investigators combed the town, interviewing friends, neighbors, and family members, tracing alibis and motives, but the threads never coalesced into a clear picture. Some theorized a crime of passion, others a carefully planned act of revenge, still others a ritualistic killing, given the odd behavior observed at the scene, the covering of mirrors, and the apparent time spent inside the home after the murders. Forensic limitations of the era offered little help. Fingerprints were crude, blood analysis non-existent, and the concept of psychological profiling was decades away, leaving the lawmen of 1912 grasping for evidence and relying heavily on confessions, tips, and the fleeting memories of a terrified town. Multiple suspects were arrested, interrogated, and tried, but none were convicted. Trials collapsed, confessions were recanted, and the town's anguish transformed into a collective unease, as the killer, whoever they were, remained free. By the time Part 1 concludes, the Moore home stood as a silent monument to loss, a place of mourning, fear, and unanswered questions, with shadows lingering in every corner, echoing the whispers of 8 lives cruelly extinguished, and setting the stage for the global fascination, psychological analysis, and chilling recreations that would carry the Villisca Axe Murders into the annals of America's most haunting unsolved crimes. The investigation into the Villisca Axe Murders stretched across months and years, yet each lead seemed to evaporate like mist in the morning. Sun leaving investigators frustrated, the public enraged, and a community forever scarred. Law enforcement officials meticulously examined the list of potential suspects, from neighbors with grudges to itinerant workers, with no alibis, scrutinizing the movements of Frank Fernando Jones, whose prior altercations with the Moore family painted a tempting motive, and William Mansfield, whose suspected series of axe murders in Iowa suggested a pattern of escalating violence. Yet despite interrogations, public pressure, and high-profile trials, the case remained unresolved, fueling media frenzy, rumor, and speculation that would persist for over a century. The community's response was a mixture of grief and fear, as families barricaded windows, neighbors scrutinized strangers, and the town's very rhythm was altered by the knowledge that one among the Moore, perhaps a stranger, could commit such slaughter without detection. Churches and civic groups held vigils, while journalists documented every eerie detail, from the macabre tableau of the covered mirrors to the notion that the murderer had lingered inside the home after the killings, eating, moving, and observing, as if mocking the town's inability to protect its own. Over the decades, the house itself became a symbol, a site for historians, paranormal enthusiasts, and true crime investigators who sought to recreate the events of that night, analyzing floor plans and behavioral patterns, debating endlessly how the killer executed the murderers so efficiently, why they left the weapon behind, and whether the act was premeditated or opportunistic. Each theory, from the plausible to the supernatural, added layers to the story, keeping the Villisca Axe Murders alive in the collective imagination. Authors, filmmakers, and television producers seized upon the case, producing books and documentaries that blended meticulous research with narrative suspense, exploring the psychological dimensions of both victim and perpetrator, highlighting the horrifying innocence of the children juxtaposed with the calculated brutality of the killer, examining every clue, every inconsistency, every unverified confession, and every reported sighting or tip, creating a global fascination with a crime that remained unsolved despite every possible effort. Psychologists and criminologists have since analyzed the killer's behavior, suggesting traits consistent with organized offenders: high intelligence, meticulous planning, and a lack of remorse. The ability to blend into the community, and the capacity to perform extreme violence without detection. The peculiarities of the scene, the covered mirrors, the placement of lamps, the preparation of food have fueled theories ranging from ritualistic intent to sadistic pleasure, and debates continue over whether the murderer returned to the scene in a psychological compulsion, a desire to relive the act, or simply to mock the authorities. Across time, the Moore family has become emblematic of innocence, destroyed the victims remembered not only for their tragic deaths, but for the broader questions their murder posed about security, morality, and human cruelty. The house still stands today as Villisca Axe Murder House, a haunting reminder of lives lost, a destination for tourists, paranormal investigators, and those who seek to understand the darkness that can lurk within ordinary communities, a house where the echoes of 8 voices silenced so cruelly continue to demand answers. Modern analysis has revisited the suspects, scrutinizing the historical records of Frank Fernando Jones and William Mansfield, exploring potential accomplices, and applying contemporary forensic reasoning to evidence once dismissed. Yet every new theory seems to circle back to the same chilling reality. Someone, somewhere, committed 8 murders with precision, left the murder weapon behind, and disappeared into obscurity, leaving a town to grapple with fear, grief, and the terrifying knowledge that some crimes resist closure, that some killers evade justice indefinitely. The Villisca Axe Murders more than a century later remain a benchmark for unsolved mass murder, a study in human depravity, and a narrative of suspense that captures imaginations worldwide. Inspiring podcasts, documentaries, and social media discussions all drawn to the haunting question: who killed 8 innocent people in a small Iowa town, and why did the killer leave behind not only their victims but a trail of mystery that defies explanation, forever cementing the Moore family's tragedy as one of America's most chilling and enigmatic true crime stories. And as we leave Villisca today, the house looms silently against the horizon, a monument to unanswered questions, to the chilling power of an unresolved crime, and to the enduring human fascination with the darkest corners of history, proving that even as decades pass, some mysteries refuse to die, and some stories of evil continue to haunt every generation that dares to ask, who could do such a thing, and how could they vanish without a trace?